Well, hello again. When we left at the end of part 7, we were just ready to put on a coat of primer to cover the whole of the upper deck. We've now done that, and we're now ready to look at the remaining painting that has to be done. And that's the light grey on the vertical surfaces, the very dark grey in the centre of the decks, and we also have to put on the Artworks wooden decks. Once that's all finished, we'll give it a coat of UV varnish. So let's get started. Okay, so now we've given the whole thing a coat of primer, and you can see it's gone right round all over the decks on both sides. All the brasswork has now been primed. There's one or two areas look a bit rough, for example around here, but that's because this is masking fluid which got roughed up, if you like, when I was removing the part of plastic that was there. But the next thing that we have to do is we will be painting this centre section dark grey. Now that will run from there to there, and from there to there. So this centre section here will be painted dark grey, and that's because in this part of the vessel the decks were painted dark grey. From here to there and from here to there will be Artworks wooden decks, and they are at the moment masked with masking fluid. Now before we paint this, which will be done with an airbrush, we will need to do some masking. And the reason for that is that I don't want paint to be airbrushed through these gaps here down onto the vertical surfaces here. So we'll need to put some masking underneath this part right the whole way along, coming out flat to prevent any overspray going underneath there. And we'll also need to put some masking on the underside to prevent any paint being blown down through these companionway hatches. So that will be the next part. When we then look at the side walls, we'll need to mask in a different direction to prevent light grey paint being blown up onto the deck. But let's do the masking just now to prevent the dark grey paint landing on the side walls. Alright, that's me now ready to airbrush this centre section. I've mixed up my usual airbrushing mixture, which is half and half paint, thinners and a spot of flow improver. And this is going to be the centre deck here, so we're going to be using Tamiya's XF24, which is a fairly dark grey. I've mixed up enough probably to do several times what I want to do here, but I hope I've got it about right. So in we pop this. There's plenty. Now my compressor is about to go on, so that's the last you'll hear of me. I'm just going to let that dry for a bit before we continue. I don't want to flood it, and there's certainly plenty of it going down at the moment. So I'll give that a few minutes to dry off, then I'll put on another coat. The actual area that we're trying to do is from there, that line there, up to here. So there's quite a lot of overspray here, but that's all masked off, so that'll come away when the mask comes away. So we've got from there to there. And again, with a bit of overspray here. So I'll just give that a few minutes just to dry off, and then I'll come back and continue. I'll come back to you when I've finished off painting this part here. Okay, so now we're ready to airbrush the lightest of the greys. The deck's ready, it's been prepared. I've masked off the centre section, which has been airbrushed with the darkest of the greys, and now we're just about ready to do the last part. So glove on, and so I clear this airbrush out. Oh, helps if you've it plugged in. Hold on a minute. One of the essential things with compressors is that they tend not to work unless they've got electricity. So mine now has. Let's just clear this. That's fine. It just has a little water left in it there from cleaning it out from the last time. So let's add. Now this is the same mix as I always use, which is half and half paint and thinners and a spot of flow improver. So now I'm going to put the compressor on again and we'll get started with this. Yep, well we're getting there. The problem with this is that this light grey Life Colour DKM 50 Hellgrau is so close to the primer colour that it's actually very difficult to see that it's going on. I can't see it because the surface has turned wet looking, so I know it's going on, but just exactly how much is going on is another matter entirely. Thank you. So we'll just keep going at it. I'll put a coat on per side, let it dry, and then come back to it and possibly do another coat. We'll see how it goes anyway. But certainly it is going on. There's still a wet sheen about the surface. So I'm quite happy with that. Now let's turn it over and do the other side. Okay, that's the first coat. We'll give that a chance to dry off, and then we'll put on a second. It'll just need a light coat because that's pretty well covered it, but we'll come back shortly. I'll put the second coat on, and then we'll have a look at how the deck's finished, because we'll take all of the masking off after I've put the second coat on, and I'll see you for that. Okay, well, now we're back and we've finished all the painting. We've had a chance to dry for a few hours. The next thing that we're going to do is remove the masking, and we have at the moment masking tape on the centre section, and at the ends we have masking fluid. So we've now got to remove all of that, and then we'll have a look at the deck sections that go, the wooden deck sections that go on there and on there. So, first things first, a glove, because this deck, this section now is now clean. It's simply just a matter of hooking something under the end of it. The trouble is it's now sticky, and sticky things on gloves don't go down too well. So that comes off very simply. Now there's a couple of wee bits I see. I'll get this out the road. Oh, get off. There's a couple of wee bits I see that have been affected by the masking tape, but these will be fairly simple to touch up later. There's a little bit of colour being lifted round there, and there's also a mark there which I think may have to be touched up, and we could probably be doing with putting a bit more paint on there. However, at this stage the next thing to do is to lift the masking fluid. Now, masking fluid dries rubbery. I'm just trying to see where the edge of it is. It dries rubbery and should peel off reasonably easily. So we're just starting at the corner here, because I can see the edge of it, and I don't know if you'll be able to see, but that's peeling off. And if you just be a wee bit careful with it, you can actually sometimes get the whole lot off in a winner, which isn't going to happen because I see we're with a little bit of in there. I'm not sure whether that's lack of masking or whether it's paint, or whether it's masking that's still there with paint on top of it. And in there. There's the edge of it there, you see? And you get a straight line there because the masking solution went down on a straight line at that point. But you can see how it's done. You just simply pull the dried masking fluid away, and it comes away reasonably easily. I will have to go over it afterwards and tidy it up. As you can see there, it doesn't really matter how well we do this, because the Artworks wooden deck will be sitting down on top of it. Right, there's some wee bits I need to go over here and just tidy them up. What I'll do first of all, let's give it a wee blow to blow away any little parts that are left. Now you can see, I'm sure, that there are lots of wee dots and so forth along here, and that's because the masking fluid we haven't got it all up properly, and I need to go over it later with a knife. But let's do the other side, and once we've got the majority of it off, I'll just switch you off and tidy it up. It's coming up there nicely. It's not quite as easy as lifting up masking tape, but it's very precise in what it masks, so you can be, if you're into really awkward spaces, it's much better to use this masking fluid than it is tape. In this instance I could have used tape, but I really did want to demonstrate how masking fluid works. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tidy this up now, and when we come back we'll be looking at the wooden decks that go on top. Okay, now I've given this a bit of a tidy up. The dark grey paint that you see flushed in here and in here will in fact be covered by more superstructure, and so that it's not really important that that's gone over there. Now we now come to the next part, which is the fitting of the decks. Here we have the part of the decks that we're on to now, and I have in fact cut these out. So I'll just pick that up from there, and that deck goes, I hope, here, and this deck here goes there. Now they've still got their plastic backing on, so what we can see from this excuse me, is that there's quite a bit of space between the deck and the upstand for the next level above that, and I'm going to check that the next level, the vertical walls of the next level above do in fact fill these spaces, because if they don't we'll have to think of a paint to put on these wee parts. And the same on this side. It's actually a better finish on this side. There's only a couple of bits here. Now that's where we removed these wee wall things that were there, so these will have brass fitting on them. And there's this section here so that we need to have a think about. So that's the way it'll fit. I'm just going to go back to the instructions for the next level, just to check on what's going to fill up these spaces before we glue the decks down. But as you can see from this part here, there's still a lot of deck structures in here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there. And over here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 parts over here. So there's still a lot of deck work to be done on it as we come up through the levels of the superstructure. So okay, I'm going to check now on the next level and make sure that it fills these spaces, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, now I've done some checking from the instruction leaflets from Goralski's book and from the Artworks instruction leaflet to check that both of these decks are in fact correct. And I've found a couple of points that need addressing. If we look at the bow section here, I was concerned to make sure that there was something that fitted into these cutouts, and there certainly is. All of these cutout parts are accurate and there's no problem there. However, on the instruction leaflet from Artworks, if I can just find it, it shows that this deck continues along here. There is not that part on the deck itself. It's very specifically shown as being left behind when you cut that out. And so, if I can just bring this in here, for example, that's it there, it runs along that part, and it's very specifically shown as being left behind. In order to sort that, I have two options. The first one is I can either brush paint this dark grey a little bit further forward so that it comes underneath the next deck up, or I can fabricate a small piece of deck to fit in there. Now, I had a look at Goralski's book to see if it showed anything at all on that, and on one page, I'll just let me move that out a minute. On one page, there is shown just a wee peeking through of that deck. Now, this photograph here shows the back of the forward superstructure's base, seen from just astern on the port side. And you can see there a wooden deck. Now that will run right across to the other side of the ship. And so it would appear that the Prinz did in fact have a small piece of deck there, but that the Artworks kit, or the Artworks set, does not include it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fabricate a piece, move this back in a bit, just to run along there. Now I think I can just about do that. You have to be careful when you're fabricating these pieces that you get the grain of the deck running the correct way. And in this case the grain of the deck is running bow to stern, so I have to find a piece wide enough to fit in there where the grain is running bow to stern. And it is actually, there's only one small piece on this part of the deck where that can happen, and it's this spare part here. And if I was to fit that in there, I might just get away with it. I'll check the other spare pieces of Artworks decks that I have lying there and just check and see if there's anything a little bit better, but that looks as if it might do the job. So that's on the bow section. On the stern section, again, everything looks fine. These triangular pieces are there, these parts that are there, we're okay in here. However, at this point here on both sides, there is a semicircular cutout shown there, and again there. And this is where the rangefinder towers meet the deck. I'll just let you see what we're talking about on the front page of the Goralski book. These are the rangefinders. That's the forward and after rangefinders, and they're mounted on a tube that goes vertically down to meet the deck. I'll see if I can find a slightly better photograph of them. Here we go. There's one there. And as you see, this tube comes down and meets this deck here. Now a choice again. One is that I can, oops, just set that back down again. One is that I can remove this section of deck here on both sides, so that the tube fits flush onto the deck, or I can file back the base of the tube so that this will sit just under it. It would need possibly half a millimetre, quarter of a millimetre, something like that, filed off there to do that. Now, in order to find out what I'm going to do, I'm going to make up an after rangefinder tube and sit it on top of that just to see what exactly is involved. But when I come back, I'll have done that and I'll have decided what to do here. Okay, be with you shortly.
Here I've taken one of the after rangefinder towers and placed it in position on the after wooden deck. I've then drawn round it with a pencil to mark its position, and I did this for both sides. I then removed the deck from under the towers with one of my knives.
Now, I just wanted to briefly show you this before I go ahead and do anything. I was looking to find a piece of Artwork's deck that would fit into that space that we were talking about. And I just came upon something which I think is worth mentioning. This is a spare piece here, which I shall now bring into focus, of the deck that was used for the main deck of the Prinz Eugen. There was a cutout from there which was right up in the bow, and this was spare deck. Now I looked at this and I thought, well, that's fine, I'll just cut across there. Then I had a look at putting it in position, and I noticed that the grain of the deck is different from between the main deck and the upper deck. The grain of the wood is much coarser here. The planks, if you like, are larger than they are on this piece. I'll see if I can find it, get you into focus. On this piece, which is for the upper and above decks, the planks are smaller and narrower. So if I'm going to take a piece and fit it in, it has to come out of this section here, somewhere. Just for your information, I've also brought in an old bit of hunter deck, which I have. I'll just lay that across if I can find where you are on my camera. Yep. And you can, this is from, in fact, for the Graf Spee, and you can see that the deck is totally different. It is much coarser grain. In fact, you could almost say that it was hardly planked, or hardly noticeably planked, but the deck type seems to be totally different. So if you're going to go back to old pieces of deck that you have to make up bits, you have to make sure that the planking at least looks the same. So that's where we discard the hunter. We discard the main deck pieces, and we have to take, oops, get rid of that as well, we have to take our spare pieces from this part, which is all that we have remaining from the upper deck pieces, and really the only spare bit that we've got that might fit is probably that bit or that bit.
I have here laid the upper deck onto the main deck, and you will see how the new scratch-built piece of wooden deck inserted at the back of where the forward superstructure will be fitted. From this angle, you will also be able to see the cutouts that I've done on the after wooden deck to accommodate the rangefinder towers. It's also easy to see the difference in the grey colours between the hull and the upper deck sidewalls.
I'm just on the last phase now of working with this deck, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a couple of coats of Winsor Newton's matte UV varnish. Now, I tried this before on the hull and main deck and it came out quite well, but I did have some difficulty in airbrushing it. It's quite a viscous fluid, and I had some problems getting very much of it through the airbrush. It did come through and I did get coats on, but I decided this time to try thinning it a bit. So I've tried to thin it with water. It's about 50-50%, possibly a little less water, and I'm going to try airbrushing this deck now. Now, in addition to that, I've put on here a piece of masking tape. Now, this part of the vessel will in fact be underneath one of the main turrets, so it will not be seen when the ship's assembled. But I want to just check and see if there's a noticeable difference between the paint finish with and without varnish on it. So we'll see what happens there. Now, I'm ready to go now, so let me get some of this into my airbrush. There we go. And I'm about to switch the compressor on, so that's the last you'll hear of me for a wee while. Oh yeah, that's coming through, albeit slowly. That's fine. You can see it coming through. It's coming through quite heavily now, and you can see quite a lot of it. In fact, I'm almost at risk of flooding it a bit. So I'll just move a little bit quicker, I think, on the rest of the job. Okay, we'll let that dry, and then I'll probably give it, I don't actually know if it'll need another coat, but we'll let it dry anyway and see how far we get with it. Just as while I'm on the video, just a word on safety when you're airbrushing. It's not desperately important when you're using water-thinned acrylic paints, but for almost any other kind of paint at all, whether it's enamel or whatever, you really should wear a face mask. Some of the solvents that are used are very aggressive, and they're definitely not very good for your health. So I would never airbrush using any other kind of paint at all other than acrylic without a face mask. And probably even more than that, probably some sort of very positive filter. Just a particulate air mask is probably not enough. But I don't use other paints, so it's not an issue that I do have personally, but certainly I think that for others, when they're using any other kind of paint at all or varnish, some good form of filtration is essential, and it should be maintained and filters renewed regularly. Okay, so we'll see how that comes out, and we'll move on from there. Well, we've now finished all the painting work that's to be done on this level of deck, and we can move on to the 2 levels above in the next episode. We're starting to get up into the navigation and command areas now. So when I see you again for the next part, we'll start working on the 2 deck levels above this deck. So we'll see you soon.